I wouldn't be surprised if most people who watch my content, or have at least played Fates when it was released, are familiar with the more controversial aspects of Fire Emblem Fates' development leading to its critically acclaimed release. But a story not often told is simply how intelligence systems went from Awakening, Fire Emblem's final swan song, to Fates. In this video, I'll tackle the development history behind many aspects Fire Emblem Fates is widely known for, such as the multiple routes, who were involved, its music, new gameplay features, the plot, and even how it was changed outside of Japan. While yes, I'll cover the localization changes, there's lots of interesting stuff, at least to me, that revolves around not the typical skinship / treehouse complaints that sometimes revolve around discourse with this game. I also will be talking about a lot of developers in this video, so just bear with me when I pronounce these names. I'll do my best, but I'm not promising anything great, so please don't can me on the pronunciation of these names. Multiple routes. Since Awakening had been received with critical acclaim and thus would no longer be the series' swan song as once thought, intelligence systems began looking for ideas to base their next game on. One in particular stuck, and its genesis came from the very first game in the franchise, the aspect of multiple routes. In the first Fire Emblem game, depending on which village you went to, you could only choose either Aaron or Samson. But no matter which character you chose, the story didn't change. When I said, I wish it would change something, my senior told me, we can't due to limited memory capacity. I remembered how futile it seemed back then. And I said, Maeda-san, wouldn't you want to play a game where you could see what would happen if you chose the other side? I want to try this. And then I thought, if we packaged them separately, people could have the fun of choosing which one they wanted. A few days later, Maeda came by and said, I agree we should make 2 games, but I also think you could choose not to ally with either. This way, the idea of choosing between 2 different kingdoms, and thus 2 opposite sides of a war, was born, while also deciding early to include a third path where the player could choose neither side. The route split also influenced many aspects of the game. For one, it's the reason Fates is named the way it is, due to how much Corrin's main choice impacts everything. Second, it pushed the desire to make each side distinct from one another, with Hoshido being heavily influenced by Japanese culture, and Nor being more Western-styled, but with a twist of the grimmer atmosphere. And third, it allowed intelligent systems to focus on both veterans and newcomers in the series, which is very noticeable when you compare Birthright's grinding opportunities and simpler map objectives with Conquest's more restrictive, traditional, and challenging experience. Overall, work started on Fates' concept right after Awakening's Japanese release, April 2012, and it would have nearly every aspect of its framework set in stone just 7 months later. Staff and roles. Compared to Awakening, those involved with Fates were composed of both old and new talent. If we get into specifics, Kohei Maeda and Genki Yokota reprised their roles as directors. The producers this time were Hitoshi Yamagami, like with Awakening, and Masahiro Higuchi. Yusuke Kozaki and Toshiyuki Kusakihara returned as artists. Only Nami Komuro remained in the writing staff from the previous game, and she would work alongside Yukinori Kitajima, Shin Kibayashi, and others. The soundtrack involved the returning of Hiroki Morishita and Rei Kondo, plus newcomers like Takeru Kanazaki, Yasuhisa Baba from the WarioWare series, and Masato Koda from Monster Hunter. Lastly, Studio Anima once again animated the game's cutscene, while Spooky Graphic handled their storyboarding. As for how the work was handled, Higuchi commented one team worked on Fates' core engine while different ones focused on the level design. To economize work, some content, mostly a few maps, would be reused in all 3 paths, but given their own twist. The game's main musical leitmotif comes from one song in particular, If One's Thoughts, known as Lost in Thoughts All Alone internationally. It was written by Hiroki Morishita, and its lyrics were written by Maeda, with some variations of the song being used for each of Fates' routes. The singer Renka, who would later become a pop singer and songwriter, was chosen to sing it and to be Azura's singing voice in the game, with the song serving as her debut to the music industry. For the English dub, meanwhile, Raina Strober would take this role, while also doing Azura's normal and singing voices. New features. Fates' development implemented many new features that contain an interesting story or purpose behind it. Number 1. My Castle. My Castle was implemented with the intention of giving players activities unrelated to the main campaign, where they could interact with others, chat with some of the game's characters, and even have battles. Per Higuchi, My Castle ended up having so many features that the staff at Intelligence Systems ended up considering it its own game. When asked by Iwata about why the feature was pushed despite giving more workload to the team, Kohei Maeda replied it was to ensure players would get familiar and endeared with Fates' cast. The feature was also initially conceived to work exclusively with 3DS's Street Pass feature as a means to connect with other players, though due to Kibayashi's request, the option to visit others via internet connection was added later. Personal skills and Dragon Veins. The idea of having units with unique personal skills, as well as the mere concept of Dragon Veins, was initially conceived during Awakening's development, but it never ended up being implemented. Since the idea was present from the very beginning with Fates though, the feature did make their way into the game. Phoenix Mode. Just like Casual Mode in Awakening, Phoenix Mode, a feature exclusive to normal mode that instantly revives fallen allies the next turn after being defeated, was added to help newcomers finish the game, without having to require developing one new difficulty setting below normal. Gaiden-styled weapons. Weapon durability and weight being removed, similar to Fire Emblem Gaiden and later on its remake, came as a result of thinking how to make newcomers enjoy the game without stressing them out with saving important weapons for later maps, which could lead them to never using them anyway. To make up for removal of weight, each weapon type was balanced in such a way so they all had respective pros and cons. Skinship. Finally, Skinship was initially conceived as a side effect of implementing live 2D technology into the game when characters would hold conversations with one another, which at the time was quite novel. Right after Higuchi had approved its implementation, he warned intelligence systems to not do anything weird. Given there were worries live 2D's impact would be lessened due to overexposure, Maeda suggested it could be used to replace the confession scenes from the very end of Korn's S-rank supports. While the proposal was accepted, Maeda also thought the tech would be wasted if used only for that instance. So he thought that allowing players to tap the character's 2D models every now and then could give it more use, thinking people would like doing it. At that point, the feature would be used once per chapter. Nintendo requested to tone down the Skinship by the time it was shown to them. Reportedly, the version they saw allowed one to touch the characters literally anywhere, which was too much. And the icon shown during it, being a hand, didn't help either. As a result, the areas that could be touched were limited to the face, and the quote-unquote rubbing icon was changed to a pen. This incidentally led to a bit of a rivalry between debugging teams at Intelligent Systems. Known by the fanbase as Team A, found the whole feature unpleasant and were the ones responsible for restricting it, while the other, Team B, wanted more or less the complete opposite. In the end, Team A ended up having more of a last word on the matter. Maeda also took Higuchi's dissatisfaction with Live 2D's implementation into account, given everything that happened, so he considers that the team overall ended up reaching a common ground. The story. Those familiar with Fates' story, either directly or by word of mouth, might be surprised to hear that IS was very serious about the reception Awakening's plot got for being lacking and predictable, and very much intended to correct their mistakes with Fates. However, it was deemed nearly impossible they would be able to write 3 stories in-house, given everything they had given themselves to do. So they began looking for someone whom they could outsource the story's concept to, hopefully with prior experience writing scripts for stories. The person they went with was Shin Kibayashi, believing he was the main man for the job. We got the hint that the story has to be simple and easy to understand from a lot of people who will be playing the game, and that's sort of the idea that comes from the fact that he has been involved in a lot of stories, or manga, which is typically read by a lot of people, Maeda says. So, to address the big crowd, it's sort of the idea that Mr. Kibayashi brought to us, and that has influenced us in working on the story for this game. Shin Kibayashi is a manga story writer, novelist, and screenwriter. He's a former editor for Kodansha, the weekly shonen magazine, and has written multiple scripts for novels, manga, and TV shows under multiple pseudonyms. With the help of Kozaki, Maeda and Higuchi managed to set up a meeting with him in a restaurant. In it, they talked about the project and provided him 2 copies of Awakening to familiarize himself with the franchise, which he later played alongside his daughter. IS initially asked Kibayashi to write only 10 pages for each of the 3 routes. With Birthright only, he used those to write only the introduction, before getting carried away and ending up writing a 500-page document. IS was shocked by the sheer volume of the material and asked him to do the same for Conquest and Revelation. In the end, Kibayashi admits that he wrote what might as well have been turned into 2 whole books. Now it needs to be cleared up, the extent of his involvement with the game's story given the misinformation surrounding it, because, spoiler alert, the reception Fates' plot got was quite controversial, at least outside of Japan. Around Fates' Japanese launch, Kibayashi commented the following on his Twitter. Fire Emblem Fates is now ranked #1 bestseller on Amazon.co.jp. However, there may be a slight misunderstanding. Though I wrote about 500 pages between all 3 versions, it was just a draft. since the final scenario was the result of being passed through various staff members. I just want to let it be known that they too had a role in this. Kibayashi was commissioned to write the story's concept, which was later taken, tweaked, and implemented into the games by different writers, as the evidence suggests. Fates' staff credits list Shin Kibayashi as the creator of the original story. Afterwards, Nami Komuro is listed in charge of Birthright and Conquest's scenarios. Revelations, meanwhile, was handled by Yukinori Kitajima, per his own admission on Twitter. He also, along with his staff at Synthes, a company dedicated to writing scripts, also wrote the support conversations. And for the scenario of the whole game, Kohei Maeda, Masayuki Horikawa, Sakoto Kurihara, and Naoya Inui are credited. This begs the question, how much of what's seen in the game was written by Kibayashi? While it's highly unlikely the full script will ever see the light of day, the 25th anniversary book and the Iwata Asks interview do provide a few answers. For starters, Hinoka did not exist in the original draft. The story only considered 4 siblings from Nor and 3 from Hoshido. Most of these siblings' personalities and roles were Kibayashi's work. Camilla and Sakura's personalities were also initially different, as Camilla's way of talking would make a 180-degree change when she snaps, and Sakura used to be closer to Elise in personality. Kibayashi was the one who came up with the general story and setting for Revelation, and by proxy, Vala's role in the plot, as intelligence systems didn't exactly plan that far ahead for the third story. When we first met him, he said, "What if we made the third game world something like this?" I was really shocked. At first, it was about a war between 2 different nations, and we had a good idea of what those countries would be like, but we didn't have any ideas for a third game yet. And then we talked to Kibayashi-san. He asked, "Well, what about something like this?" Kibayashi also provided multiple situations where the game's battles would take place, something that Maeda himself valued a ton, as it allowed the devs to base the game's chapters around them. There are several restrictions that you need to do when it comes to turning a story into a game. For example, in Fire Emblem, each chapter you go to a different map and have a battle. Although Kibayashi-san had never been so extensively involved in the making of video games before, he considered all of those conventions when he wrote the story. I was very grateful for that. Kibayashi's story had a clear focus to make the reader cry, and Korin would constantly be questioning their choices. All the betrayals involved would also motivate the player to try all 3 stories and check their outcomes. Each route would also contain multiple instances of foreshadowing, and their conclusion was meant to be unexpected. To wrap this up, the 25th anniversary book includes an early draft for Birthright's Chapter 15, which was translated by the people at serenesforest.net. While it's structurally similar to the final version, it also contains many differences worth looking into. What's the same? The general plot. As in, Korin and company are looking for a path to infiltrate Nor without confronting the main army. One ally proposes crossing a mountain. A fight ensues against its inhabitants. Kaze sacrifices himself for Korin, and the chapter ends with everyone at the top of the mountain. Here's what's different. Takumi's name is Takuma. Scarlet is accompanied by a character named Mateus. Instead of being confronted by wolfskins, the Lightning Tribe, folks wielding lightning powers, ambushed the Hoshidans instead. They were reportedly replaced due to issues the devs ran into while implementing them. During the battle, a lightning bolt is launched towards Takumi, and because Korin attempted to reflect it with their sword, they end up being pushed towards a cliff. In the final game, the explosion of one of Yago's mines served this role. While Kaze tries saving Korin from falling, Lilith's Pegasus shows up to help, instead of Hinoka. The alternate outcome in which Kaze can be saved under certain conditions is not present in this script. Localization changes. Finally, it would be unfair to talk about Fates' development process without addressing the elephant in the room that are the changes it received outside of Japan. Soleil and male Korin's support. Back when the game had just been released and the non-Japanese fandom were translating pieces of it, this support chain made quite a bit of noise on the internet. In fact, it became so infamous, Nintendo themselves went out of their way to announce that it would be altered. So what happened exactly? For those unfamiliar, Soleil is Laszlo/Inigo's daughter in Fates. She has a thing for flirting with other women, yet she can only S-rank male characters, which is her quirk, I guess. During male Korin and Soleil's Japanese support chain, Soleil tells Korin she's worried her weakness for cute women makes her faint. Korin tries helping her overcome this by sneaking some magic powder in one of her drinks without her consent, which makes Soleil see people as their opposite gender. Soleil is clearly taken aback by this, which leads to this exchange. Huh? So I can see you as a girl? Yes. After what you said, I wanted to resolve your concerns, so I thought it over a little, and it led me to a conclusion. Seeing me as a girl, you can use me to overcome your issues. From now on, I'll get closer to you until you can tolerate being around me without fainting. To summarize what comes next, Corrin and Soleil experiment with the powder's effects to overcome her issue, but failing completely. Soleil appreciates Corrin's gesture, and the A support ends with them both as friends. Besides Corrin's questionable choice, there isn't much wrong with the conversation at first, but this is where the S support comes in, as it justifies the characters marrying by having Soleil mention she fell for Corrin from the moment she saw him as a girl. Start from the B support with the S support, remove the context of the conversation, and suddenly, it can appear to some that Corrin had cured Soleil by having her fall for him. The controversy really came from and this is an important detail, a sarcastic tweet that was taken out of context by journalists who proceeded to misunderstand the translation, according to the article covering this controversy on Cantopia, the site which is where a lot of the translations are sourced from. For those wondering how the international version differs, their script keeps the general idea of the support but replaces the magic powder with a blindfold. Plus there is consent this time. Skinship changes. May's 2015 Japanese Nintendo Direct showed the first footage of the Skinship feature for the public, and oh boy, the overseas fanbase didn't know what to make of it. Come the game's North American release, many gaming news sites reported the feature would be cut outside of Japan, before clarifying later that only a small minigame between the player and their S-ranked character would remain. And to this day, I am sure you can still find discussions on whether or not this was a good move for North America. Lastly, while the game did have more changes outside of these two, for the sake of brevity, I will mention a few that stood out the most for me. The voice banks available for Corrin were cut from 5 to 3, most of the game's swimsuits were left unused overseas, leaving only the bath towel available. Many options to manipulate the camera in the hot springs were also removed. 2 DLC missions featuring conversations between characters and some CGs were never localized. Most of Hoshiden's bias and casual racism against the Norians only exists internationally. Niles and Rajat's S-rank supports with male and female Corrin respectively were tweaked to be the same regardless of gender, while in Japan they were more unique. Saizo and Baraka's entire C support was changed into an exchange of ellipses, which honestly feels more of like a community meme than anything to me. Lastly, excluding the special edition of the game, only the Korean version comes with both Birthright and Conquest included. Everyone else had to more or less buy the other paths at a discount. And well, that's all for today. This video wanted to provide an objective look at the development history of Fire Emblem Fates, from who returned, new features, the game's story development, and the changes specifically for the localization. If you wanted to know what I found the most noteworthy aspect of its development, I would honestly say it's the story, based on what I find interesting to me. It seems like Shin Kobayashi was very passionate about his duty to conceptualize the story, going as far as writing incredibly detailed, to the point of Maeda himself being taken aback by the work he put in. And for all that work to seemingly be mishandled by others feels a little bit sad to me. Of course, I don't know anything more than what could be dissected from these interviews, tweets, and so on. But yeah, if you ask me, that's what I find the most memorable out of all of this. To wrap things up for this random Fire Emblem Fates video, if you did like it, please show your support by liking and commenting down below your thoughts. Without getting into a slap fight over censorship, what are your thoughts over the content discussed in this video? The channel is less than 400 subscribers away from 85,000. If you're one of those watching who is unsubscribed, please consider doing so. You may not believe it, but it really makes me happy. I'm working towards the ultimate 100,000 subscriber goal for this channel, and your simple contribution helps it get there. I also want to thank my patrons, Parnholm, Melissa Farmer, Jay Brox, Artorius, and Adelaide, and especially my $40 patrons, Furmuzzle, Michael Taylor, Prime Fusion, Sleepy Sky, and Stephen Rupp. If you want to support me through Patreon, please check the link down below. We're a small community, but we like to have fun together. Thanks for watching. Deuces.